You're the president.
I'm the president.
Yeah, thank you.
Currently.
Currently.
We'll see how much longer.
Yeah.
How we doing? Oh, okay. Okay. And everybody can hear me? Okay. All right. Can I get everybody's attention? Welcome everybody for coming tonight. Everybody online and in person, appreciate it. We have a good crowd. This is awesome. We have a great presentation for you tonight from Yannick Artiola, right?
Right.
Yep. I want to remind everybody we have a hybrid meeting going on, so please keep your conversations to a minimum. Respect everybody online and here as well in person. So make sure everybody signed in and got a ticket. We have a couple great prizes for everybody that came today in person. So we'll have a drawing. So yes, please sign in, get your ticket. That's right. That's right. We also have some free seeds, and I brought a few Myers lemons to share as well. So. All right, I'm going to get going. All right, so can we keep the chatter down, please, and we can get rolling here. All right, thank you for coming again. We have a great presentation on biochar in the Southwest here tonight from Yannick. He's a retired professor, associate professor from U of A. I learned he just retired in 2020. So very recent. He worked in environmental sciences department at U of A. And he is a soil scientist and chemist with specialties in water quality, waste management, and soil health. For 36 years, he has a lot of experience working with soils, water quality, and fertility in the desert Southwest. So welcome, Yannick. Appreciate you coming. Thank you so
very
much.
Keith. As I was telling Keith, I did grow up part-time in a farm, or we did a lot of vegetable growing. So I do pretty much appreciate what you guys do. Unfortunately, I cannot do that now in my present location. I wish I could. So I do envy you, those of you who are doing it. I miss growing tomatoes an awful lot. We want to demystify biochar here today a little bit. There's nothing really strange about it. You will see in a minute. We're going to give you a presentation that I've given you before, not to you, but on webinars, and I've modified it somewhat. Still a little technical, but I think all of you have know enough that you will forgive me if I sometimes you don't understand some things. We'll go over it, but it's very simple. We'll go over the composition. I think it's important for you to know what biochar is, how it's made, and then how it's produced. We'll characterize it too. There's some issues about that in terms of what the benefits are and everything else. We'll talk about some of my experiments that I conducted and some of my publications that I did on that, at least one. And then I'll give a summary and recommendations based on both my research as well as some common sense stuff that I think you'll all appreciate. So going back a few thousand years, right? You've heard about that, pre-Columbian times. Australia, even the Aborigines, they all knew about biochar in a way. They didn't know how it worked, perhaps, but they already knew about it. So burning biomass is nothing new. Why? You look at those soils, what do you see about those soils? You all know about soils, right, I assume? What does the redness tell you about those soils? And what does that mean about the genesis of those soils? They're old, they're worn out, they're used up. So what did ancient people do? They recycled the nutrients. How did they do that? By burning biomass, right? So they discovered that if they burned biomass, their soils became refertilized. Okay, so you see these layers here in South America and Central America. I think this is Brazil and this is Australia. I forget which one it is. And you see those layers of dark soils in areas that really have basically oxidized what we call lateritic soils. Okay, so they knew about that already, okay? So in 2007 was a professor, Professor Lindemann, who basically began to push this business of what can we do with biochar besides the fact that it does have some benefits with fertility, and that is carbon capture. Can we fix some carbon semi-permanently in the environment? Because as you know, if you look at this cycle, not the clearest cycle in the world, if biomass goes back into the soil, what happens to it? Decomposes, right? So that means that the CO2 that was captured, the carbon that was captured goes back up into the atmosphere. So it's a zero-sum gain, okay? Unless you grow a lot of forests, but if you just grow a crop and then plow the residues back into the soil, then that soil eventually, as you well know, oxidizes the carbon and it goes back up into the air, okay? So he thought, or having observed burned soils, having observed research that had been done in the Amazon and so forth, that the charcoal that was there was quite old. And it's true. The, what do you call it? It's been used for many years, charcoal, residual carbon, to date soils, to date fires. In the Southwest, if you go and dig it in soil up in the forest, you will see layers. Some of them are high in char. That's how you can date cycles of fire. So this observation led him to conclude that if you take some of that biomass before you reincorporate it into the soil, you burn it, and you do what I'll show you in a minute, what happens when you burn soil. And when you put it back into the soil, that particular biochar will not go back into the air, leading to the conclusion that you could be capturing carbon over and over if you did that process of turning your biomass, bio-waste, into biochar, and then reincorporating it back into the soil. So again, demystifying, biochar is nothing but burning wood, burning biomass, okay? So you see here a very simple diagram. You may have seen it before. You got this what is that? Just a match burning, and this part turns black and stops smoking. The rest of it continues to burn, and you have this release of gases, hydrocarbons, but some of it doesn't burn completely, right? It stays there. Well, that's what we're going to be focusing on now, okay? So here are the parts that we are concerned with. So this is what I told you. Don't get scared here. What are we burning? What are we burning here? Wood is composed of three main components: cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignins, right? You'll probably some of you know that already. Okay, so what is cellulose and hemicellulose? Sugars. They're nothing but polymerized sugars. Okay, that's all they are, sugars. By the way, what insect can digest cellulose and hemicellulose? Termites, as well as cows, of course, but that's a different genre of animal. Okay, so that's where a lot of the energy is. So lignin is a different animal, so to speak. Lignin is made up of, what is this thing? No idea. Is composed of aromatic structures that are basically based on enzyme, unfortunately or fortunately. And then there are extractives, 1 to 5%, that are mostly water, moisture, that are released, that are also part of the structure. Okay, so that's really the lignocellulosic biomass, the composition. Sugars here, sugars basically connected sugars. This is the basic structure of sugar. And then this is the basic structure of a lignin, okay? The final product, when you burn biomass, you've gotten rid of all your sugars. The sugars are gone. That's where you see the flame come out when you see wood burning. That part that flames out, that produces a lot of smoke, part of the flame is really you're burning sugars. You can burn sugar yourself in a spoon. You will see that it makes a nice flame. Okay. So the result is that particularly when you do biopyrolysis, it's called slow pyrolysis or burning slowly wood, is that you fuse those benzene rings such a manner that you produce something that's alike to or similar to graphite, which is extremely, extremely difficult to biodegrade. Okay, that's really your charcoal. That is really what you're left here. There you have it. There you have it. You can see that later on, okay? That graphite-like structure means that when you put it in the soil, microbes will not be eating it anytime soon, unlike the sugars, which they will jump on right away and munch on them really quick. So if you get rid of the sugars and just leave the lignin, and then you fuse it into very stable structures, benzene-like structures, with very little to latch on by the bugs, then you have in essence an inert material that you put in the soil, but it has carbon. That carbon is trapped there. And it has some properties, okay, that are of interest to us. But again, not to worry too much about that. So how did we used to produce biochar? How did our ancestors? My grandfather used to produce charcoal before propane was brought into Europe in the late 60s, imported from Africa, I believe. It was very common for people to go, and I'm just talking about the European part, but again, ancient people have done that for thousands of years, to basically dig a pit, fill it up with wood, light it, and cover it with soil, and come back several weeks later, and all the sugars would have been burnt, and only left, what would be left would be basically the polymerized structures, lignin structures, carbon, graphite-like structures are very, very resilient. That would then be transported to the cities for people to use in their wood burning or charcoal burning stoves. Okay, so we have mountains, we have kilns, we have brick kilns, we have rotary, all kinds of designs that have been invented to produce really. And you can still buy, by the way, why are we talking ancient times? When you go buy yourself a bag of charcoal briquettes for your barbecue, what are you buying? Unfortunately, you're buying very ancient woods, probably from Mexico, made out of mesquite biochar, okay? So that's what you're getting actually, okay? So that's produced using one of those technologies down there, very likely, very low technology materials. They fill those kilns with branches and trunk and of mesquites, and they set them on fire and come back several weeks later, and they break those things up into pieces and sell them to you or to us. Okay, you also have modern ways of producing biochar, which are pyrolysis, anaerobic pyrolysis systems, very sophisticated, used in places like South Africa and other places to produce biochar in large quantities. How do we produce biochar, you and I? Well, it's very simple. Just open fire. There is this traditional Japanese. The Japanese, by the way, have been using biochar in their rice fields for many years, for thousands of years too. So that's another culture that has known about the benefits of burying charcoal into or onto their soils for thousands of years. The important thing is here that you need to set up an area of combustion, but you need to keep below that combustion area kind of a anaerobic or pyrolytic area, low oxygen area, so that you don't burn all the charcoal. Because as you know, even that very refractive graphitic-like material if you leave it open, the ashes, it will turn into ashes eventually because the combustion continues. You may not see a flame, right? The combustion continues. So you need to stop at that point the reaction. Otherwise, you wind up with a pile of ashes with no value. Well, except for the ashes. So you can get one of those things, or you can basically have a pile of material. Then you need to be very careful with it. I produced my biochar for my research with one of those stoves, which are very cleverly designed. You can probably find them in the internet, which basically have a zone where you pump the oxygen up here, a little bit of oxygen, but not much. But basically, they're so efficient that you don't see any smoke. By the way, when you burn, when you set when you start a fire, you see a lot of smoke, right? Well, that's not very good. That's really liquefied byproducts of the burning process. They're actually droplets of liquid. They're not really gas. They're droplets of liquid. The gas you don't see. There's a lot of hydrogen coming out of that pile of burning pile. There's a lot of CO2, of course. There's CO2, hydrogen, and other gases that come out. But the smoke itself is not a gas. It's really droplets of very minute liquids that are not very good for your health. Okay, that's why smoking is not the best thing in the world, right, for you? So anyway, I produced biochar like that, basically waited until the flame died out, and then I stopped the process. So it's important to realize that when you do that slow pyrolysis here, shows you that the flames are very hot, like I showed you in the previous slide there, the first slide with the match. But down at the inside the biochar itself, the temperature is around 400 degrees, 450 degrees centigrade. Now, people can pyrolyze at different temperatures by controlling a lot of things, but that becomes very expensive. So you and I don't need to do that, okay? We can just simply use fire, an open fire or a closed fire in a barrel or something like that. Just as an aside, one of the reasons why we started this research, that was instigated by a gentleman named Tim McDonald. There's a lot of biomass available, but not nearly as much compared to what northern states have. I mean, they have orders of magnitude more biomass than we have here. Why? Because it rains all the time. Yeah. There's water there, right here. Water is in droplets. So 4.5 million, 4.5 million tons of woodland and forest waste, 200,000 tons of agricultural waste. Oops, sorry, and urban waste here. Those are estimates that he made. So that kind of started a research project, which, by the way, didn't go well. I went branched out and started my own project on a much smaller scale. But those were interesting data. It's an interesting data that shows you that we do have a fair amount of biochar. But I'll tell you, I mean, of biomass. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that. What happens to these volumes? So this is what I used to start my research. I used pine forest biochar. We're lucky enough to get truckloads of pine forest waste that was run through a wood chipper. And that's important. I'll tell you more about that because it gives you already a biochar that's pretty much the right size. You don't need to play with it anymore. So here you see that's a dime. You see that when you burn it, you burn this amount, you get all these fractions. But most of them are about 1/2 inch to less than an inch. Actually, about 1/4 of an inch is the best size, without having to play with it. So processing the waste and the biomass before you do the pyrolysis, to me, is really the way to go if you want good quality biochar. I'll tell you more about that. Because you don't need to mess with it anymore, okay? And you don't want to be adding large chunks of coal into your garden. You want to add something that looks more like this, okay? And you guys can look at those samples whenever, okay? And that's the original two materials. This I made myself. basically dead branches of mesquite. So I'll talk more about that later. More data for you. I want to highlight two things. pH. Why you care about pH? Alkaline. Do we need to add more alkalinity to our soils? No, we do not. Well, guess what? 80–90% of the population in the United States wants to have alkalinity. We don't. So I'll tell you more about that. Okay, so it has a very high alkalinity. Okay, now some people say no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Okay, the one that is produced using our own waste, which are very high in salts. Okay, so you have in here, for example, a lot of potassium, not so much sodium, calcium, very rich in potassium. Okay, when you add water, you get a lot of potassium out. You got some phosphorus, and I'll tell you more about the rest of them. Okay, that's all I want to tell you. I also want to tell you the material is very light. Look at the density of this stuff. Why is that important? It's very light, very fluffy. Why do we care about that? Pardon? Internal surface area is very high. You're absolutely right. But the fact that overall it's very light, why should we be concerned about that? Pardon? No. No. Blowing away. And I'll tell you more about that. Don't want to have that stuff blown around. Okay? I'll tell you why that's important. Okay? Where that is not a concern in most places in the US because the soils are naturally wet. Here the soils are naturally dry. You see the difference? Okay, so all those things you need to take into account. You need to use your logic here, not your, Okay, so let's leave that. So losses on combustion, that is after you've burned this material. This, by the way, this is all original data, has never been published. And there's an awful lot of data condensed in here. But the most important thing is that when you burn this biomass, to the point that I tell you, on average, you lose 80% of the mass. So you start with 100 tons. What do you get? 20 tons, right? You start with 10 kilos, you get 1 kilo. Okay, so a huge amount of mass loss. Why? 62% of the carbon is lost. So we need to be careful in being just saying that, oh, we're just capturing all the carbon. No, we're not. Particularly with this process that you and I can afford to do. Maybe somebody can sell you biochar that is produced differently. But the one that you and I can afford to produce, which is low technology like I showed you, is going to give you huge carbon losses that are going right back into the atmosphere. Now the remaining 40%, yeah, you can say it's in the soil. I captured it. Right, okay. Nitrogen, 60% loss. Okay, who uses compost? You all use compost. How much carbon is lost on compost is not a panacea either, okay? Let's be clear here, okay? So how much carbon is lost during composting? Nobody has any idea? You're pretty darn close. So it's not a panacea either, composting, okay? You also lose enough 40, 50% is not uncommon, okay? If you do composting well. Okay, so you do lose a lot. Why? Because when you compost, what you're doing, you're feeding the bugs to eat on what? The sugars. They eat sugars, they love sugars. Okay, so that's the problem. Okay, so composting is very good. You probably don't have nearly as many losses. For example, here I recorded macronutrients of those down here. Many as 45% losses. And that's averages on all those things. By the way, I tested all those wood chips. You can produce biochar from pretty much any biomass you all have around your yards and gardens. Whether it's acacia, pecan, tamarisks, atriplex, juniper, you name it. Okay, it works. It's no magic in saying, well, you need to have this wood or that wood. One thing that I would recommend is that you do not mix waste when you produce biochar. Why is that? Again, use your logic here. There's nothing, nothing. Exactly. Burns differently. Okay, so anyway, let's move on here. Just some of my experience. Sure, sure.
So this was going back to the alkaline soil.
Right.
So is, given that it is alkaline, how does that work in our soil?
Well,
If you could repeat that.
yes, the alkalinity is not beneficial for your soil. So the way and I'll show you some data that shows this effect in a minute, is basically by rinsing the biochar several times, washing it, literally, pardon? With regular water, yes, and I'll tell you a little bit more, but that's what I recommend. And this is why, did you see in here, look, this is not too complicated. I did some tests with romaine lettuce, started with fresh biochar. Fresh means that it came out without any washing. Here, that's the control, 0 control, 2% biomass, and 4% biomass, okay? So look at the white bars here. You notice that the 2% has slightly higher yields. At the 4%, the yields are down. Well, that was the first time that I realized that we have a problem. Okay, and the problem was during the germination process. If you germinate, if you plant seeds directly onto a soil that has been amended with fresh biochar, you're going to kill the seedlings. So the recommendation is that before you apply that material, you simply wash it several times. Then you get rid of the alkalinity and the pH drops very fast. Okay. Yes, sir.
What are we getting? What's the value of this?
Well, I'll tell you in a minute if you let me finish. Okay, if you let me finish. It's a long process, but don't worry about it. Okay, let me continue. Okay. So anyway, I did some biochar basically where the material had been used once, so it had been washed several times, and the yields went up with biochar, and then it also, you can see in here, when I leached it several times, when I leached the soils even more, the fertilizer that I had added remained. Not too statistically significant, but there was a higher yield, not too significant, suggesting that the biochar, as you mentioned before, it's very porous and traps fertilizers. So you have less fertilizer losses. Okay, again, that was a very marginal result, but it did show up some positive trends in here, okay? Bermuda grass. So the greenhouse results, basically here, I basically shut off the water completely here. And after 30 days, no water, the control was all dead. I mean, 0, nothing growing. The 2% biochar had about 50% of the grasses, more or less, give or take, were still alive, and they kept on growing. And the 4% biochar, most of the Bermuda grass was alive after 30 days of stress. That's one benefit for you. Your sprinklers go bad, okay, and basically you do not lose all your crop. You do not lose all your grass in your yard, okay? Okay. It's not water retention. Oh yeah, water retention. This is a mix of desert mixes that I did, again, summarizing a lot of the research in here. I grew them in various pots and mixes for revegetation purposes. And here I saw the same effect. Several months, 6 months of growth with clippings, 1 month of drought, the same thing. The addition of biochar improve the survivability of that grass, those grasses significantly, just by having biochar there, okay, without any water. Okay, so I've gone pretty fast through that, so my summary is going to be pretty quick too. The production of green waste is obviously it's a reaction that is exothermic. Some people that produce biochar also couple it with energy recovery. Those sugars have a lot of energy. Okay, so some people have gotten clever, like some farms actually that have, I don't know, chicken productions or animals that require heating, or greenhouses in the wintertime that have coupled biochar production with heat recovery. Something that we don't need to do here. But that's one of the benefits. You are releasing a lot of energy back into the environment. Okay? If you could trap it and capture it and use it for something, that's a positive thing. You can also then have that material and use it if we had, for example, carbon credits for farmers, where they could say, well, I've captured, let's say, 100 tons of biochar into my soils in my 500-acre farm. I can get, $20 a ton or something for credit, then you can make some money out of that, right? So carbon credits could be beneficial for large-scale users. Biochars can be produced from any source materials. That's important. But you do need to understand that you are losing significant amounts of nitrogen and other nutrients, okay? But again, comparing it to composting, as was mentioned, you can lose up to 50% of the carbon just by composting. I have not seen enough data on composting. It's one of those things that I've seen a lot of people using them, but not a lot of data out there. Okay, but the papers that I've read on composting suggest anywhere from 40 to 60% carbon loss, but they don't talk very much about nutrient loss. Probably not nearly as much as with biochar. That's my opinion. Probably a lot of the micronutrients do stay there. Some nitrogen may be lost. Carbon, definitely. It's a different material, okay? Because some of the sugars and some of the structures are not nearly as resilient, and they're still decomposable because, as you all know, you need to keep adding compost in your soils, right? Why is that? Because you keep feeding the bugs that eat them, right? In the natural state of our soils in Arizona is not high carbon, it's low carbon. That's the natural state of a soil in Arizona. What you're doing, in essence, is when you do your gardening, is you're really creating a potting soil, to be clear, okay? And potting soil, as you know, when you put it out there, you have it even inside your house. After a few years, it goes, right? Well, it's biomass being evaporating into the thin air, okay? Or being recycled back into the plants, whichever. Combination of both, okay? In light texture soils meaning sandy soils, I was able to observe those effects. High water retention and lower nutrient leaching. But I'll bet you, I did not conduct those tests, that if it wasn't a clay soil or a loamy soil, what would you think those effects would have been? Not the opposite, but certainly less significant. Wouldn't that logic tell you that? Why? Because those soils don't lose water as fast as sandy soils, right? And they do tend to hold to nutrients also more readily. So it stands to reason that if you add this stuff for water retention or for water holding capacity or for nutrient retention, your benefits are not going to be nearly as significant when you apply them to heavier texture soils. Okay. Those recommendations, I'm going to put a caveat on a couple of them, but basically, again, those come out of my common sense, not necessarily because I researched all of those, okay? Avoid mixing yard waste when making biochar. Again, you gave me the answer. You did give me the answer. It's, why do you want to mix things that burn differently? Okay, don't mix things that are potentially toxic. Like, I don't know, there's a few things that are toxic out there you don't want to put in there, like the oleanders. Please don't make biochar out of oleanders, okay? Use biochar with average sizes of a quarter or less. You do want to maximize the surface. Somebody pointed surface, you did. Because you do want to be able to trap a lot of water and nutrients. So putting a large chunk into your soil really has very little utility other than displacing air, displacing soil. There's not enough surface in here to catch much of anything. But if you have this thing, there's an awful lot of surface in here to trap water and to trap nutrients. Yes? No, 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 no. Never put that stuff on top. No, because what I mentioned to you before, it's very light and fluffy. Okay, mix it on as fast as you can. In fact, the best thing is for you to mix it wet into mulch, into compost. Which leads me to the second one. The third one here is again due to the alkalinity. Make sure you leach the salts as much as you can. And if you have a pH meter, some of you may have it, right? Just take some of that rinsate coming out of the bottom of your 5-gallon bucket. That's all I did is I took a 5-gallon bucket and filled it up with biochar and then filled it up with water, let it sit there overnight, then drain it and did 3 or 4 times. Check that pH coming out of the water. And if it's, between 7 and 8, you're okay. But if it's still high, do it again. Yes. No. Well, you can, yeah, I'm sorry, wrong. You can use it if you put it in a native tree of some kind, yes. It's not, nothing is gonna happen to that tree. 4, can you use that water, that rinsate water? Yes, for any native tree, yes, but not to water your tomatoes or carrots. Okay? Yeah, they don't need any more salts, your tomatoes or carrots. They don't. Okay? So ratios here, I should take that out because I really don't know. But my feeling is that if you use, you could probably go up to, I did 4%. You could probably go up to 10% biochar if it's properly pre-managed, reduced in salts, and probably nothing would happen to your soils. You would look pretty dark and black, not too pleasant to look at. Yes. So. No, by mass, yes, not by volume. Yes.
By ratio,
the ratios that I gave and the research that I did, everything is by mass. By mass, not by volume. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. I should do that. So use biochar in soil backfill. So one thing that you could do with biochar and prevent any issues with aeolian transport dust, i.e. dust, is use it as a fill for your bushes or your trees mixed in with compost. This way you won't see it anymore. You might just see the benefits, but you will not see the biochar. That's the best thing you can do in biochar in our soils. In our soils, see, I'm repeating why, because of the issue of having that stuff go airborne very quickly. Okay, so keep biochar on the ground where it's not easily going airborne. That is critical. We don't want to have clouds of dark dust moving around your yard. Okay, the stuff is not healthy for you. I want to be honest with you. Okay. Yes, sir.
you recommend, I see it says quarter.
I wouldn't want to go much lower than that because basically when you process it through a wood chipper, when it's finished, yes. But this here, for example, I did that. In fact, I did that the other day. Guess what I was doing the other day? I used the same stove and I had found some chestnuts, which are very difficult to find here. We lost all our trees, I guess. And I like the chestnuts to be always cooked on fire, not on the microwave or whatever. So I got some of this I keep some box or 2 of these things, my yard things, and I may buy roasted. And then I basically, when the flame stopped, I quenched the material in there with water. That was it. This is what you get. Now this for this to be useful in my garden, I would have to grind it. How would you grind this stuff? Yes, ma'am. What was the, I'm sorry.
How big? Okay.
How big? I would say a quarter of an inch or less is what I would recommend, okay? But not much below, not much beyond that, not much below an eighth of an inch. Okay, an eighth of an inch, maybe you can go 1/16, but don't go much finer than that because then it really is easily uplifted by wind, okay? And besides that, when you manage, when you mix it and you handle it, it's going to be very nasty on you, okay? So how do you now take this thing and turn it into this? This is wood chips, right? You don't need to do anything with those, as far as I'm concerned. You started with this wood chipper, and you came up with that directly. Isn't that great? It's a huge reduction in size, and it just shrinks. And here I started with this. Let's keep branches, and I got this. What do I do with this thing now? You need to smash it. How do you smash it? In very carefully. Okay, put it in a plastic bag. Okay, make sure that it's wet. Don't do it dry or damp. And then hammer it. But you're going to wind up with an awful lot of loose material. Okay, it's a bit of a mess. Do that outside with a mask and make sure the stuff is dry. I mean, is wet or damp. Okay, that's what my recommendation would be. Okay, but you won't get the homogeneous material that this is. This is relatively very homogeneous. And it's really great, a lot easier to handle this thing. But it does require that you invest in a wood chipper. You could all invest in a wood chipper and share it. It's the easiest thing. Nobody needs a wood chipper full time. Just run those strings to a wood chipper. Get everybody get their, their material, and then go ahead and experiment. Please experiment. Experiment with your own waste. Experiment with your own amounts. Don't put it on top of your entire yard. Just take a plot, do your own research, a couple of square yards. Mix it in there within the top 6 inches. Grow your radishes, see how quickly they die or not. Okay? And just, do your own research. Don't invest on, yes, sir.
I think I'm in kitchen that
Right.
in gardening, I mean, that's the question. Shall I that out?
Okay.
You said ashes, just like do the spirit.
Yeah.
So at what stage we need to stop the process of shedding the ashes?
Okay. Good question. Good question. We're trying to do two things there. Okay, we're trying to do two things. So what is at what place do we stop the process of burning? Right. That's what you mean, right? So the hint that I gave you before is when the flames go out. When the flames go out on your fire and you begin to see the coals, you stop. How do you stop? Water. If you let it sit there after the flame stops, which means the sugars are now gone, and you're beginning to burn the lignite, that fraction that you want to preserve, then you're going to wind up with a pile of ashes. You're absolutely correct, sir. Okay, so the hint is always the flame. Okay, the other thing is that the more homogeneous your material is, that more homogeneously it's gonna burn. So if you have thick and thin branches, the thin branches will turn ash very quickly, but the thick ones will take a lot longer. So what's the best thing for you to do? Wood chipper. And that gives you a very, very nice mix of very homogeneous particle size biochar that tends to, as I say, when you light it up on fire and the flames go out, they tend to go out and give you a very nice homogeneous biochar material. Whereas this is a little bit more difficult, but it's still the same principle, flame. Flame stops, you stop. You stop it with water, okay? Does that make sense? Thank you for the question. That was maybe not clear before. Did you get that, ma'am? Yes. No, I have one. Huh? I could possibly lend it to you all. Is there a place in town that has a wood chipper? I know they're rentals probably, but they're not that expensive. Okay, we're talking about small wood chippers. I have an electric one. Okay, that will process, a few branches, and I don't usually run more than a 1/4 inch to a 1/3 of an inch dry branches through it, and it does a pretty decent job. Okay, it produces. You can do it pretty quickly. Okay. So, and you could pass it around. I mean, they're not that expensive. If you could invest on one as a group, then you could just pass it around. That would be one option. If you guys want to experiment, I'm actually willing to lend you for a few days mine. Yeah. As long as you take care of it, don't run rocks through it. Yes, ma'am. It's very easy. Yeah.
The question was,
Okay, so how do you start a fire with just wood chips? It's pretty easy. You can start a fire. Right, but I mean, what I said to you, what I showed you before is very critical, that you do need to put that in a container. So that 55-gallon drum would be more difficult to manage, but the shapes that I showed you before that are kind of like an egg shape or funnel, inverted funnel shape are the best. Those are the Japanese designs they use to produce that, because it doesn't allow air to come in from below. And it creates a zone, anaerobic zone or paralytic zone of low oxygen, okay? And that allows for the prevention of everything becoming ash. As everything burns, the other things becoming ash too. In a wood pile, because you got air constantly coming in, there's a constant generation of ash, besides the fact that typically it's a mess of sizes. Okay, so homogeneity and a bit of a containment of the fire is kind of critical, not critical, but at least it makes your life a lot easier in producing quality biochar. Okay, does that help? Yes, sir.
As you mentioned, putting out the fire with water, you also mentioned.
No, I apologize. That's a mistake. No, what I did is what they did is yes, putting out the fire with water versus putting it out with soil. You misunderstood me. You don't put out the fire with soil. You cover it with soil when you bury it in trenches like that. It's covered with a thin layer of maybe a sack, something semi-porous, and then you cover it with soil to prevent air from going in. And then the reaction goes below without no flames at all. That process happens over weeks though. And that used to be done in ancient times. My grandfather did it, I remember that. If it's well stacked into that cavity, into that kind of trench, the branches are well stacked and homogeneous in size. Then you put a sack on top of that trench, cover it with 2 or 3 inches or 4 or 5 inches of soil, depending. The soil won't go into it because you've got that sack, that cloth. Got a cloth, and then you light it on fire, and the fire is actually internal. okay? But it's very slow. But because it's under anaerobic conditions, it's under very low oxygen conditions. The only oxygen that is used up is the one that's inside the wood itself, with minimal input from the atmospheric oxygen. Okay, does that make sense to all of you? Yeah, but you don't want to do that. Believe me, you don't want to dig a hole in the trench in your back. Okay. No, you don't want to do that. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So when we leach the biochar from adding water, should we be concerned about losing nutrients? You are going to lose the nutrient salt that nobody cares about here, potassium, calcium. You might lose, and it's very doubtful that you might lose a little bit of phosphate. I would be very surprised. I never tested it, but the sulfate is very insoluble under alkaline conditions, as you all know. So you won't lose any sulfate. You won't lose any nutrients, micronutrients at all in calcium. You don't care about sodium, right? So no, you won't lose any nitrogen or carbon at all. So take that material that's going to look like milky and put it on a mesquite there that you have, you know, or something, some natural. Let it dry, or you can incorporate it half wet into your compost. You don't need to let it dry. Why let it dry? Unless you want to, you know, do something else with it. But you know, I wouldn't. I keep biochar wet. That would be my, you know, if you can, keep it in the container or you don't need it. Don't leave it laying around. Not a good idea. In our environment, again, those things are common sense for our environment. You may talk to a friend of yours who lives in Oregon and says, "What are you crazy about? I leave it outside all the time and nothing happens." Of course not. It's raining all the time. Right? So any other questions about this? Yes. Right.
How are you gonna use it? I mean, I would imagine that I would want more than just a little bag.
Of course. Of course.
So it's, there's a, with composting, it's.
Easy.
it
You
does
go.
itself. It
yeah.
does itself.
Yeah. You need to mix it and add some, you know. Yeah.
But, so is there a way to do it a bigger scale? Like, not like huge scale, but like, well, like, I guess a bigger fire, but I'm asking, I mean,
You can make it at any scale you want to, but you know, I mean, depending on the material, how you start with, what kind of a container do you start with? So again, remembering, so the scale problem, right? The gentleman was asking, how much can I make so quickly? Well, it depends on what container are you using to make the biochar, right? So if you start with 50 pounds of dry matter, which is not a lot because it's so light, you're going to wind up with 5 pounds of 10 pounds of biochar. Okay, remember that. It's huge reduction in volume and mass. Okay, 10 pounds is a good amount, but do the math in terms of adding 2% of it, okay, by mass onto your topsoil. How much does the soil weigh? Okay, so do the math. Remember that those calculations about acre furrows and stuff like that. You all remember that from you don't remember that? So basically, you know, there are 2,000 tons per 2 million pounds of soil on the top 6 inches of an acre. Wow. Okay, that's the average bulk density that we use. Okay, does anybody remember that? The soils, basic soils. Yeah. Been a while, right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what we use more or less to calculate then percentages. Okay. So calculate that if you have, let's say, 1 square yard of yard, and you want to add biochar to the top 6 inches, and you calculate what's the mass of 1 square yard down to 6 inches, then you're gonna know how much biochar you need.
2% is
I would start with 2%. I would start with 2%. Okay. And then, you know, step it up as you see it, as you see necessary. But again, do your own trials. If you're willing to experiment with this, if you are not willing, then I'm not sure whether there are any commercial companies. I was contacted recently. I gave a presentation. I think, no, I didn't. But the company that comes from the Northeast, Northwest, that's interested in marketing it to farmers here, said, well, you're going to need an awful lot of biochar because of the extensions, the volumes that we're talking about, okay, here, and the fact that you're losing 80% of the mass. So, it takes, you need a lot of biomass to produce, a few pounds of that stuff. But calculate your requirements, and then you can do it in batches too. You don't need to do it all at once. Depending on what you've got available, you could have maybe small, container, metal container that you got laying around, that you can cut in half and use that to make your chart. Okay. Again, the homogeneity of what you start with, I think, is critical to the quality of your biochart and to reducing your handling afterwards. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No. You start it and you don't put anything else on top. You start with a mass that you want to do. So do you add more material onto the fire as you started, or you just start with one fixed volume? Don't add any more. When that's done, take it out and do another one. But do not keep adding. Okay. Now there are automated industrial processes that can do that, but not here. Okay, so you start with a fixed volume, you let it burn till it gets to this point, and you stop. You stop. At that point, you stop. Yes, ma'am. That container here, well, you can see here, the Japanese don't mess around. This looks to me pretty big, okay? But those are the farmers there, I'm sure they've done it for thousands of years, and they probably do it a little bit every year. It could be anything. This one here, let me show you this one here that I used. This is about yay tall and yay big. Okay. That one here, I believe, online, here it is, wood gas mega stove. It's incredibly efficient at burning. That thing, it's amazing. I have a small one too. But this thing is amazing because it captures every BTU. There's no smoke coming out at all. If you're concerned about smoke, there's no smoke coming out of this one. Because the smoke is burned right up here. There is an enhancement of the oxygen content. And so any smoke that is produced down here reaches the zone, it is immediately combusted. So the BTU outcome of this particular stove is incredible. And so if you're concerned about smoke for your neighbors, this won't produce any smoke at all. Yes, ma'am.
I have a few questions from online.
Yes.
One is,
I've heard it. I wouldn't give you a good opinion on that because basically it requires that you soak it in fertilizer. And on that, I would recommend do your own trials. I never did that, but it is potentially something you could do. Okay, in other words, soak it in a nutrient-rich, after you've leached all the salts, of course, in some kind of a nutrient-rich solution like, that you guys use, a starter solutions or something like that, and see what happens. See if you see a response or you burn the plant. Okay, I mean, it's potentially a good thing to do. Okay, would I do it? I have not done it. Okay, but it is potentially something that could work.
and then also Jolly Roger Biochar film on YouTube uses 50-gallon barrels.
You will find everybody's been very inventive on this area. Okay. You can even maybe find commercial biochar available. Pine forest biochar, I'll tell you that right now, it's very low in salts to begin with. Why is that? Because it comes from the northern forest. And forests already have soils that are relatively leached out. And so mesquite is a lot higher in salts. Any one of the materials that I showed you is much higher in salts. So you need to pay attention to the salt content and the pH. If you guys have a little pH meter, use it. Okay. But it won't take much. It won't take long. Let that thing sit there. Okay. Don't be in a hurry. Okay. In water. Okay.
And, can you grow plants straight in biochar?
I wouldn't.
My friends in Malaysia
Yeah.
told me that a rooftop garden in Kuala Lumpur grew plants in straight biochar.
And what's the climate in Kuala Lumpur?
Yeah.
Tell me. I mean, it rains a lot. Huh? Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure it's possible. As long as you keep rinsing and rinsing, it's a sponge. It's a mini sponge, right? So yeah, it'll hold the water there nicely, right, for plants to grow. If it rains all the time, you probably don't need soil. You will have to put some fertilizer every once in a while, I assume, right? Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like aquaponics, yes, or hydroponics, or yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yes. Yes.
$400
So,
for that stuff.
Is it for you?
It's not
Oh, okay. Well then,
Sister is this one.
no. It's a categorical no here in the Southwest. If you go somewhere else, it's a maybe or a must. But right now here, yes, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, is it good to put ashes back into the garden? No, not here in the Southwest. Again, we're being here local, okay? We're being here from this region. Somebody from New York State may have a different opinion, okay? And a different experience, but does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah, you can start it from the top. Yeah, you can start it from the top. Yeah. You can start it anywhere you want to with the top. Yeah. You know, I cheat a little bit. Sometimes I add a little bit of starter fluid. It burns very quickly. It evaporates very quickly. There's no residue left, okay? Because it's very light. And then within to get it going, okay? Because as somebody mentioned the fact is how do you burn wood chips? Well, guess what? Starter fluid. I'm cheating. I cheated a little bit here. Okay, but just a little bit. No, that's just a little bit. Okay, not you don't soak the whole thing. Okay, just a little touch.
And it's an oil based.
And it's still organic, believe me. Starter fluid is organic, believe it or not. It is
It's petroleum.
organic chemistry. Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. 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 Oh. Oh. Great. Great.
Great idea.
Fantastic. I would see it, no problem, unless that material was very high in salts. I'm not familiar with
I know
those
it's big
with those teas.
because I have.
Okay,
I have like
okay, that would work too. Yeah, sure. Yes, adding some kind of organic extract onto your biochar, kind of load it with nutrients. As the lady was saying, on the Northwest, they do that regularly. And so I don't see why that could not work here either. If you got some good organic extract of some kind, okay? I don't know which one you could use it, I have no idea. But that would be a form of loading the biochar with nutrients before adding it into the soil. Is it? Okay. Well, that would be something that some of you may want to experiment with.
Yeah.
And send me the data.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. I see. That could be something. That could be something that that would be a good research to do here,
Mhm.
to kind of start up or to activate the biochar. The biochar is very unreactive, very dead.
Mhm.
So and when you have a wet environment with biochar, you can see immediately that if the biochar is not toxic at all, that there are little filamentous roots that begin to grow around there. Some bacteria beginning to colonize the areas.
Mhm.
I didn't observe that because my experiments did not last long enough, and because here we go through a lot of wet dry cycles.
Mhm.
So for those conglomerate or consortium of bacteria and fungus to build up here, it's a little harder.
Mhm.
Okay, whereas in the northeast, west,
Northwest,
there's
yeah.
probably a lot easier because it's the natural state of a soil there is wet, right? And sandy loams, right? Perfect for fungus. Perfect. Yes. Yes. That's a different paradigm, okay? Change your chip here. Yeah.
So this is from online. Charlie says, while soaking biochar in a barrel of water,
Uh-huh.
I mixed it with a large electric heat mixer.
Okay. That's an interesting approach. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. I don't see why not. Let your ingenuity, take over. Sure.
Yeah.
There's probably new things to be discovered on this. Sure. To get some of you excited to experiment with this, processing it and make it safer, why not? Please do. That's an interesting approach. But remember one thing, okay, is that shows you how easy, how fragile this material is.
Mm.
So what are the consequences of keep mixing that stuff in your soil and rototilling it and whatever?
You eventually lose it, right? Yeah.
Okay, but that could be over several years, many years, okay, it could not happen overnight. So that's one of my preferred approaches, at least here, to be quote unquote very safe, would be to just use it as an underground or a below ground surface additive for bushes and trees. And then you'll have to kind of like wait and see what happens, right? But still, you won't be exposed to it in any way, shape, or manner. However careless you are with your watering or lack of watering, you won't have to worry about that stuff going airborne because it's 6 feet below
Mhm.
your feet or the root canopy. It's there doing its job of perhaps releasing nutrients, perhaps holding water to increase the survivability of your bushes and so on. But it's not in any way, shape, or manner a danger to you or anybody else. See what I'm saying? So that's anyway, that's yes. ma'am.
Have you noticed that? Something like hummus, vermiculite.
Those materials are extremely, they've been really heavily researched for greenhouse hydroponics. There's a lot of data on those, and they're superior materials because they're very structurally stable. And so they can be very easily manipulated and recycled over and over and over. They don't have any of the potential toxicities that this material could have if you keep grinding it down. And they're very, very, very hard. Pumice is very durable material. So pumice versus biochar. Pumice is a very rigid material, very extremely porous, holds water well, allows for all kinds of things to grow in between there. So there's a lot of research on those. They're very expensive, okay? And you could add those to your soils, but you know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, okay? I think biochar will be a lot cheaper for one thing, but biochar does have those issues that I'm mentioning, and just you need to use your common sense here, not, you know, based on your environment. Your environment here is different. Okay, so ma'am, you had a question?
It's round.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Yeah.
That would work.
Mm-hmm. That's your biochar. But if you start with, oh, mesquite wood, right? So she's using a Weber, a barbecue. You can use an old barbecue, one of those oval barbecues, just
That's a
remove the
good
grill
idea.
out of it and everything
Lot
else,
cheaper.
and just use that. And then
Yeah,
start with mesquite wood and set it on fire. Wait until it's all. I usually mix it around. I got a long stick. Mix it around. Make sure that the thing burns as evenly as possible. Then when the flames go out, quench it, and that's it. You've got your biochar. Yeah. Yeah, try to keep it, you know, fairly constant if you can. This is a little variable here. You can pass that around if you want to. I mean, I did that with
A lapper.
that's it. You know, that's all I used.
What
just
is that?
Big things. Sure, here,
Thank you.
pass it around here. There's anybody wants to look at those things?
Decent at it.
Yes, sir.
Charcoal, biochar. Isn't it readily absorbed things like nutrients, something about?
Okay, that's a good question. Yes, does biochar absorb nutrients? It does. There is a bit of a controversy with that. In my own mind, the only nutrient that it'll probably absorb in significant quantities is probably ammonia.
Oh, really?
But it will not absorb, or if it does, it will quickly release nitrate.
Nitrate.
Now, ammonia is positively charged. Nitrate is negatively charged. Nitrate behaves like chloride in the soil, leaches very quickly, as you well know. Ammonia, on the other hand, has to go through the process of nitrification, right? Okay, that it tends to stay more, it hangs around. So ammonia very likely is retained there. Some other micronutrients might also be retained there, like iron, zinc, and copper perhaps. But those are added in such small amounts that it's hard to tell where they wind up. I don't think it will absorb phosphates, phosphorus in the form of phosphate, or nitrates. And again, if it does, it'll probably release them very quickly. Okay, there's a bit of a controversy with that because of the structure and the surface chemistry of the biochar. Okay, but typically the surface, the inner surface and the outer surface should be negatively charged. So if it's negatively charged, then positively charged ions such as ammonia will tend to be retained there more. Now, in your case, though, when you're going into positively charged environments such as acidic soils, that's a different story, right? Then it's the opposite. But here, typically ammonia will be the one that will be preferred, okay, to be absorbed in our soils if they're negatively charged, as they should when they become more and more alkaline. Okay. So does it make sense to you? Okay, but I think the absorption of nutrients in there is probably highly variable. That's why there isn't a lot of research there, because it's very, very much material specific. condition specific. It's a lot of variables that can affect how that stuff absorbs. One thing that I noticed in biochar when I was trying to come up with a particle density of biochar is that I had to spend a lot of hours to saturate the biochar with water. What do you mean by saturation? Remember, biochar is a sponge, right? Got all this porous holes that are part of the original structure of the plant, part of the expansion of the heat, creates all these microenvironments. That means that if water comes into the particle from both sides, what happens to the air in there? Sometimes it gets trapped.
Yeah.
So you have a particle that never really reaches full saturation unless you
Mm.
really, really work at it, and
Mm.
it's very small. That's why adding this stuff to the soil, it's going to stay mostly empty.
Because it's too big.
It's difficult to
Yeah,
saturate
not enough
this.
surface area.
That's why there is a size issue that is important. Because otherwise you don't saturate, you don't take advantage of the porosity of the particle.
Mm.
Does that make sense to you? Okay. So that's another issue with size. But there's a lot of variables there that can enter into this equation. That's why I suggest that you all experiment. Small amounts, roll plots, teas, using teas if you want to use teas, so forth. Are we finishing off?
I'm just saying we have 10 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Sure. Well, is there any way to determine when the pyrolysis is complete? In our case, flame. Flame. That's it. Okay. Don't overthink it. You might see some washes, some ash forming in some parts. Don't worry about it. Okay, but
Right.
or you just wash it off. Okay.
It's supposed to be
Yes,
wet
sir.
anyway.
Tinkling sound, that's really good time to punch it.
As long as
If
the
you're using logs like that.
Yeah, if you use large logs, so the tingling sound on logs, I'm not familiar with that. I mean, I've usually been producing biochar using as homogeneous a material as possible and as small a size as possible to make my life easier. And I didn't want to cut down trees either. I don't recommend you cut down trees to make your biochar, okay? That's not the point. The point of producing biochar is to use something that's otherwise goes to waste, winds up in a landfill, goes back into your soil, then releases all the carbon back into the atmosphere. The point is to take that part and capture it in the soil and hopefully do something for this thing called climate change that nobody believes in. And so, maybe help mitigate some of it. Yes,
Online question.
yes.
Is the purpose of biochar in Arizona a method of reducing landfill waste? It seems quite the risky dust-producing pet gel-involved process with composting waste works so well.
Did you hear, ma'am? I have no arguments with this argument. It's basically, yes, if you want to do compost, go ahead, do compost, but do understand that you're also releasing a lot of carbon out. Okay, and compost will degrade much more readily than biochar will. I mean, eventually compost will degrade too, because you have never completed that restructuring of the carbon structure that's so refractory. That graphite-like structure that is produced during the combustion process makes the biochar carbon a lot more stable in the soil environment than your compost will ever be. But I'm not saying that compost is bad, not at all. Compost is great, okay? So the point here is to not only get benefits for nutrients and water retention, which you get very readily from compost, but also to capture carbon. Remember, that's the argument that we've been using, okay? Capture carbon into the soil environment for hundreds, if not thousands of years, very likely. There is data And the estimates range from hundreds of thousands, hundreds of years to thousands of years in some cases. I mean, you can see the proof there in the first pictures that I showed. Okay, so that's one selling point. Okay, was the carbon business, carbon credit, you know, and so on. For you, it's probably, I hate to say, it's probably not relevant. You're doing very small scale, you know, farming. So. If you run your tree limbs through a wood chipper and you add a little bit of nitrogen, they will compost. So you could, right. You could if you want to, yes, or barbecue. You should be able to do that. You should be able to do that. Just experiment with different amounts. There's no reason why you can't do that.
So I just have this question one more. It's what you said this thing, and I don't know that equation of like you have 2 million, you know, per acre, 2 million.
Per acre foot, acre furrow, acre furrow. Look up the definition, acre furrow, and you will find that probably online. Acre furrow. How many pounds of soil are in an acre furrow? And you will see that it's about, I think it's 2 million pounds. Okay, and then it's the top 6 inches only. And then from that, you can back calculate down to your yards. Okay. Acre furrow, acre furrow. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, furrow. Yes, I think it's furrow. Yes. Yeah, and so that's only the top 6 inches. It's considered the quote unquote most important part of the root zone. The root zone is what? Up to foot, up to 5 feet, supposedly, depending. But most of the plant, well, your small plants probably take up water mostly in the top 6 to 12 inches of water. I mean, radish is probably only the top 3 inches, but the tomato plant and things like that, probably the top 2 feet for corn is where most of the nutrient uptake takes place, and tomatoes, I don't know, probably that area. And then, but the top 6 inches are very important for small vegetables, like salads and things like that. So it's always used as, and there's also the plow layer. Forgot about that. That is where you do the mixing typically. The top 6 inches. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Welcome.
If you have any questions, you can also email me anytime. You're welcome to share my email.
All right. Thank you so much, Yannick. Thanks,
You're
thanks
welcome.
everybody for coming. Before everybody leaves, we do have a couple of door prizes. So, announcement date, spring fair. So our spring fair is going to be on March 16th in the spring. It's going to be from 1 to 9 or 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Sorry, not the other way around. That'd be a long fair. And we're also going to change locations this time. We're going to have it at the Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind. It's going to be a much bigger venue, better parking. Yeah.
Really nice.
It's going to be, we think it's going to be nice. We're going to try it for the spring. If it works out well, we'll try to keep it going. So.
But there's a whole picnic.
Seating. There'll be bathrooms for everybody, not just the vendors. My thing is it's going to be much better to get in and out of for the customers because the parking is going to be just so much nicer.
Forgetting anything? Bye-bye. Bye-bye. You're welcome.
Thanks, Yannick.
Take care.
Take care of yourself. All right.
Bye-bye. You want to borrow the wood chipper? Let me know. I'm not joking. I didn't joke. I didn't joke. You're welcome to borrow it. Pardon? No, you have to worry about that. Just borrow it for a few days and see what really you like it, and then you can maybe find one on your own. They're not that expensive, but I mean, you guys like it.